This is Batman calling from Wayne Manor with a special announcement. From the great halls of their house, there are assembled three who hope to one day be the world's greatest driving heroes. Created from the cosmic legends of the universe comes our team captain, the Vision, Bill Fisher. And their soon-to-be Wonder Woman, Vicki Fisher. And our Captain Marvel and head flight trainee, Jennifer Scripchuk. Their mission: to fight injustice, share what is right and wrong, to get you out of your house and come out racing with them and serve all mankind. They are the Garage Heroes in Training Team.
Welcome to the Garage Heroes in Training Podcast. I'm going to be one of the hosts for this episode. My name is Bill. Who else is hosting?
I'm Vicki.
You are. Vicki,
I
do we have a
am.
guest?
We do have a guest.
We do.
We do. I'm very, very excited.
I know.
Welcome, Samir Abid.
Samir, we've been trying to get you since we heard about your podcast. Welcome aboard.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks, guys.
So for those of you playing the Garage Heroes in Training home game, you may have heard Samir on the Ross Bentley podcast. You may have heard him on his own podcast, which is Your Data Driven, which is not apostrophe RE. It's your, like, possessive. He has been a race engineer for not only driving, but several other sports. He is not only does he do the coaching and assisting, he actually races himself, and we're going to get into that as well. And on his podcast and his website, he has so much stuff there, it will take you days to get through it all, and it's overly helpful in so many ways. And my personal favorite, he's got Excel spreadsheets, so you know I like my Excel spreadsheets. So thank you for everything, Samir.
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely great. Yeah, that's anything that is on the website that can help drivers and their teams. That's what it's for. So yeah,
And we need the help.
We do. Sometimes one lap more than others, but yes, we definitely do.
Mm-hmm. So, Amir, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, about your family life, professional life? You know, let our listeners get a little bit familiar with you.
yeah, absolutely. So today, I'm here under the Your Data Driven banner. So you can go and check out the website yourdatadriven.com and all the podcasts and the courses and the spreadsheets and everything. But before that, rolling back, I graduated as a mechanical engineer, automotive engineer, and I spent probably the first 10 years of my career working for car companies and motorsports companies, so designing road and racing cars for people like Aston Martin and Jaguar Land Rover, but also motorsportsy kind of things like Multimatic Motorsports that people may have heard of in North America. So and then I got asked by a friend of mine from Formula One. He said, I'm moving into the world of Olympic sports, and I'm like, oh, good for you. That's good. That's great. He goes, yeah, well, actually, we could do with a hand. And the world of Olympic sports is getting more technical. It's getting more data oriented, and there's not that core skill set. There's never been the need for that in Olympic sports before, and we could do with your help to try and help us navigate through that. So then I sort of switched hats and worked in the world of Olympic sports for the last 10 or 12 years. And that was fascinating because I was suddenly surrounded by people who were struggling with the numbers, but I could work with them, and then they could see, actually, this stuff can actually add value to what I'm doing, and it's not intimidating, and it's not something to be worried about. It's something that I can, or they can use themselves and make a lot more progress and reduce some of the uncertainty, shall we say, about making decisions. And I've been in many meetings where we have a little bit of a round table, and everyone's throwing their opinions in on what we should do. And I said, just imagine data's another seat at the table, and it's not telling you what to do, but it's just giving you that another opinion. And taking that concept is kind of what got me through the last few years, and then I'm moving that back into the amateur motorsport world. I kind of miss the cars, if I'm honest with you. And so COVID happened, and it was I had the blog anyway, and I thought, well, let's turn this into the proper business. So I'm now helping the amateur racer in a very similar way. So some people who are maybe intimidated by the numbers, or they haven't used that kind of methodical process before, and everything's a little bit like, well, this has happened, and everyone throws their opinions into the ring. And in fairness, like, all those opinions could probably be right, and then we just spin around in a circle, and sometimes we make progress and sometimes we don't. And so what I'm trying to do is help people maybe take a bit more methodical approach with data, but with some analytics, so that at the end of the day they go quicker and have more fun, because going faster is more fun, I think. So
So
how's that for something?
Good.
It sounds awesome. I think one of the stories I heard, and perhaps the reason why you want to get back into automotive, is it's probably easier to tell a car which way to go as far as the racing line versus telling a marathon runner. Is that kind of a
Yeah, so I did a little bit with the runners, and one of the more famous ones that I can talk about is the 2-hour marathon project. So yeah, I worked with Ilip Kipchoge and on this amazing project to do a world first. He is the world record holder, and he's just won the Olympic gold medal in the marathon. But this was a challenge. Like, could any man at the moment, any man or human, run under 2 hours for a marathon distance? And if we went full engineering on it, like, what could be done? Could it be possible? And so I was on that project, and my contribution was the line. So we surveyed the whole. Well, we first worked out the right track. It had to have the right atmospheric conditions, as be flat or notionally flat, and then we LiDAR scanned the whole area, a bit like you do with a racetrack. Particularly for a computer game or something, like they would LiDAR scan the whole track, so you get every curve and bump. And we did that for this facility in Vienna, which is a public park. It's a 4.5 mile stretch with 2 roundabouts at the end. And my work was really trying to optimize his route around this course, so that he used the least energy. And just to give you an example on that, like, if you run up a meter and then back down a meter, so you're back to the same height as you were, you have a net loss in energy compared to if you just run on the flat.
Right.
Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah. So even though you're back to where you started and you kind of gain a bit on the down, you've lost going up. And so my role was really to make sure that he didn't run uphill too much, and to make sure that we were on the flat. Now, what that meant was that the line that I worked out, I had all this GPS data, and I'm like sitting here trying to work it all out. But the line that I worked out was the flattest line for him, but it wasn't the classic line that you would. It was a classic racing line for us. We would think about that as a motorsports people, but if you were just running that yourself, that's not the line you would have run on. And it took a little bit of negotiation, stroke, believe me, this is quicker, for them to run on it. And then they ended up painting it on the floor. So I sent them a whole load of GPS coordinates, and they painted it on the floor, and that's what they ran on. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, they credited me with 8 seconds in his 2 hours, which, like, depending on your perspective, either sounds rubbish or like brilliant. He to put that a little bit of perspective, he tried this before at Monza, at a racetrack actually, and he came up short by 20 seconds. So so we were just like nibbling all of these marginal gains, and so I'll take that 8 seconds every day. And he won. Sure. He did it by 1:59:40 something, I think it was. So
wow.
Yeah.
So all you need to do is somehow figure out how to put a steering wheel on the back of his jersey, and you would have been fine.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's more stories though for that though, because they had a pace car. Well, not a pace car. Had a car in front of him with like the time on it. Yeah, so he could see the time. But that car was driven by a race driver actually. But it had to go at a very, very specific speed. And what was interesting, well, I thought it was interesting, was that if he slowed down, like if Kipchoge slowed, so he had a pace to run.
Sure.
But I mean, this is fast. Like,
yes.
So if it's what's it, 23 kilometers an hour, which miles an hour is 1.6, whatever that is.
Right.
But just put that in perspective, most gyms have running machines. And if you put the treadmill absolutely flat out, I'm not a big runner. I can hardly keep on that. And they go about 20 kilometers an hour.
Right.
And so he's running 23 kilometers an hour for 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like, can you imagine sprinting on your local gym treadmill for 2 hours? It's just like mind-boggling. So at some point he was going to slow down, right? So he's going to slow down. So the car had to slow down with him. But what was really interesting was like, right, okay, how do we? He sort of almost had a little breather, and then how do we speed him back up again? Because you don't want to do it straight away.
Right.
You've got to do it nice and gently so that he comes back out. So it's all that kind of fascinating stuff. It's a lovely project.
Yeah, I could just imagine the people that would be flung off the treadmills at the gyms when we set it to 23 miles. I mean, 23.
I think they set one up. They set one up at, like, back in the day when you could actually meet people for real.
Mm-hmm. I've heard about those days.
Conferences and stuff. They set a treadmill up, a big one with some foam padding around it. And set it at 23 kilometers an hour, and then anyone could go and have a go. And literally, it's one of those comedy TV moments where you just literally have people falling off, and legs and limbs go flying everywhere. And it just puts it in perspective what he did.
It does. So you're not just an engineer. Not that I'm allowed to say that because I'm an engineer, but you're not just an engineer. You actually do the racing yourself. You're not just sitting there telling other people, hey. So you've got a unique perspective, well, somewhat unique perspective, in that you've been on both sides of the racing coaching as well as the racer himself. Do you have any goals or bucket list items that you have for your personal driving?
That's an interesting question. I do it for the fun of it. I enjoy it. I think I'm okay at doing it. One of the blessings and curses of having this background is that you kind of know where you can improve, pretty explicitly. And so then it's a case of like, can I actually do it?
Right.
Am I brave enough to do it, or have I got the skill or the feel to be able to do it in practice? And so for me, the progression isn't like winning cups and races, which I've been fortunate to do, but more about progression in terms of, can I put some of this stuff into action in the moment? So it's all very well sort of chatting about it when you're not at the track, but doing it in action is for sure one of my challenges.
So this is out of sequence for what we normally ask, but we've got a question: is what did you find was relatively easy to do that you expected to be harder, and conversely, when you were the driver, what did you find that was really hard that you kind of didn't think was going to be a big deal? Did you see anything as you were progressing?
Yeah.
It changes from person to person, so there's no right answer.
Yeah, I don't think there's, you're right. There's no right answer to that. I was surprised how slow going quick felt.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make any sense?
It does, because you're not tossing everything around. It seems like it's slow, but it worked out.
And it's kind of weird. So as I got up to speed, so to give you a bit of potted history of my amateur racing career, I started in whenever it was, 2006 or something, and I thought I was going to be quite good. And I entered maybe we all do. I entered a one-make series, got a car, I went into the one-make series, and with like 30, 35 cars, all the same, and I'm like, shouldn't be a problem. I beat all my friends go-karting, I know how to drive around, should be fine. And I was last, I qualified last, by like a lot. By 4 seconds. I'm like, oh, that's a bit of a dent to the confidence. Now there were some mitigating circumstances. It was snowing, and I'd never driven the car on that track, and I'd never really driven the car. All that sort of all the racing driver excuses, but still 4 seconds. It was the same for everyone, and 4 seconds was quite a long way. So One of the progression then was like, okay, well, what do I need to do to get myself up to speed? And in actual fact, being out with other people in a race helped me a lot, because I was like, oh, actually, I saw what they did, and I kind of copied what they did to start with, and I thought, well, if they're doing it, I'll try it. And it's like, oh, actually, I can do that. And so that kind of gave me sort of that confidence to try and push a little bit more. But then when you get like past that, it was just when you're really, really on the limit and sitting on the limit, it's this like sitting on one of those squidgy balls you have in the gym, like a balance ball thing, and it's just, everything's so subtle. For me anyway, it just seems to be that like tightrope, that balancing act. You're sort of sitting there all the time. It's like, get this wrong and we're in the wall. But you're not thinking that. You're not thinking it's going to go in the wall. You're just thinking, I'm just trying to balance this thing all the time. And so that's been a real pleasure for me. And so there we go. I don't know if that 100% answer, like difficult and hard, but maybe it's in there somewhere.
So what vehicle are you currently driving?
So I've got a it's called a Mazda 7. It's a low cost chassis. So I'll go full kind of nerdy, and then I'll roll back to something that most people may have heard of. So it's a low cost chassis with a Mazda MX-5 engine in it. I mean, Mazda MX-5 gets everywhere, so why not put it in in one of our kind of cars? And it's a bit like a Caterham 7, if that's familiar with.
Yep.
Familiar with that. So so the rear engine, notionally 2-seater, but it's only got one seat. Open top. No room for windscreen or anything. So.
It's like a spec series too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much, everything's the same.
That eliminates half the excuses we use. Bummer.
When you're on the track, do you have a racing philosophy, or when you share information to some?
Engineers don't philosophize.
Do I have a racing philosophy? What do you mean? What do you mean by that? Other than trying to go quicker, I don't know. What do you mean by racing philosophy?
I think we froze her.
No, it seems like I'm unstable here. So, but we like to talk to drivers because we have a lot of entry level, beginning, and all the way up to slowly starting to advancement. So, we like to talk to people and give them the tips. And sometimes people have like really good sayings, like always keep your eyes up, or, they have these tips that they say to themselves when they're driving. And I'm not sure. Yeah, don't look at the wall. No, but I know that, one thing is like always make sure you keep your car balanced, or I don't know. Some people have interesting things that they usually like to say. They're just really poor examples. But I wasn't sure if you had one, like say, for instance, you have people that are coming in. It's like, this is what I live by when I'm racing.
I tell you what, it's not a driving one. But it's connected. And it's more about the philosophy of going racing rather than the philosophy of how to drive in a circle. Okay, so and it's about sort of setting some expectations and being clear on what you want to do each time you get in the car, and then sort of when you finish, asking yourself how you got on, in effect, and in a way that is constructive to helping you improve next time. And that I think is quite difficult to do because for whatever reason, and I don't really know, maybe you guys have got an opinion on this, but there's something tied up with the concept of driving a car that means that people are maybe less honest about their performance than certainly something like the data could show. And then you can and so they're almost sort of deceiving themselves when they get out of the car, and there's like the paddock cup champions, people who are like the fastest people in the paddock, but then you see them out on the track and they're not, it doesn't add up. You're like, what? I thought you were going through their flat, but you're definitely not going through their flat. So why did you say that? why did you say that in the paddock? And so for me, it's about just that honesty of being, this is where I'm at, and this is what I achieved for myself.
Right.
Because through that clarity, then I can get better.
But yours is like, be honest with yourself and your performance.
I think so. Unfortunately, it was quite difficult is when you're in the car, I think you need a slightly different mindset. And for me, I need to some people you need to calm down, and other people you need to build up. And I'm probably one of the people you need to build up. And so it's a bit more of a kind of controlled aggression, is what I call it. It's like, you don't want to be upset and angry, which happens,
right?
Because you'll go slow, and you don't want to be too lethargic, because you'll go slow. But if you're in that kind of controlled aggression kind of thing, it's like you're kind of doing something here, and the car will give you that anyway. But you just want to, like, you're in control. You're the boss of the car, not the car being the boss of you. And that, so you're not going to let this thing beat you.
Right. Yeah, I like it.
All right, Samir, we threatened you before we started recording. I think I've got 8 different episodes to talk to you about, so I've tried to narrow it down. I think this is all going to fit in one day. We're not sure about how many hours, but we're going to try to get through as much as we can, and hopefully you'll be silly enough to say yes to coming back on, and we'll get through it all eventually. But for this one, since we've got a lot of people who are true amateur racers, many of them endurance racers, many of them autocross racers, that may not have taken that initial step towards using data or see the usefulness of using data, could you kind of give at least your feelings for an intro for the usage and interpretation of data to start with? And then I've got about 800 questions that I'll get into as we go.
Yeah, for sure. Again, it's about putting it, for me anyway, it's about putting this thing in context. So, I'm your data driven, etc., and I've got my course on how to, beginner's course on how to do data and everything. So that's what a lot of people think of me about. But for me, it's very much a means to an end. So let's flip this back and again of like, well, what are we trying to do? Well, we're going to try and go faster, and what happens in motorsports is it gets complicated really quickly. You've got a car, you've got a person, you've got the weather, you've got other cars on the track, you've got all this stuff going on, and it gets really complicated really quickly, and to the point where some of these things, some of these variables are significant enough to make a difference in what happens in your performance. So the idea for me with the data is that it starts to reduce some of the uncertainty around understanding, first off, what we did, and then second off, like how can we maybe improve that. And the what we did thing is really quite important, because you can't remember, like you just can't, like if you're out for 20 minutes, you can't remember what you did. I'm afraid. So and the data does remember that, and so that's a real benefit for you. So that means you actually don't have to remember it quite as much as before, and it also gives you that clarity of like, I know what I did, and I can really work on improving going forward. So I think some people confuse the data as a prescriptive tool. Yeah, so they think, okay, the numbers are going to tell me what to do, and I think that's where people maybe trip up a little bit, because it doesn't have that complete picture. Again, if you think about that analogy I did with all these people sitting around the table and data just being another seat at the table, you've got to take all the information that you have, and then data just helps you solidify maybe some of the questions you have about, can I brake harder into turn 3? Well, you have a feeling about that, but then we can look at the numbers and go no, or yes, or whatever.
Or you did once, right?
Or you did once, yeah. And so it's okay, well, you did that once, well, what was happening? And then if you can link your data with your video, you can say, well, what was actually going on the track? I had a couple of good examples recently in my own car. We did put some bits and pieces on the car, so I can start to do some more engineering type articles. And dampers, for example, is a hot topic in motor racing, and I want to do some work to try and help explain how they work and stuff like that. So we put some potentiometers on the suspension to measure the displacement, and we were driving around just testing it. And I was driving through this quite fast corner, and it felt like a little bit unstable. It's like, ooh, that doesn't feel so good. And the data showed that the suspension was actually binding. It was catching.
Oh.
And we wouldn't have found that. Like, we would have just gone, because I'm like an amateur driver, right? Remember that. So I'm okay, but I'm not a pro. So we'd still go, oh, well, Samir, you're not driving the car very well. Yeah, that's be your first thought. And in actual fact, we could see in the numbers there that the suspension was binding up when it shouldn't have been. And it was like, result. You know? So this is the kind of stuff that the data can start to give you, is that clarity and direction, and start to reduce maybe some of the blind alleys that we end up going down in what's very complicated very quickly.
Sure.
So what data do you look at or you look for?
So two types. There's two types really. There's one where you look at the driver, and there's one where you look at the car. Clearly they're together. The majority of the work that I spend my time doing these days at the moment is around the driver, because that has the biggest performance impact, certainly at an amateur level. And yeah, so we just start real simple. Just start with a speed trace. You know, you've got like the distance around the lap, how fast were you going, and just from that one speed trace, you can start to tell like so much information about how the driver is, how confident they are. For example, if you overlay 4 or 5 laps of just the speed trace, no other information at all, literally just I got quicker and then I slowed down. If you overlay 4 or 5 laps, or 3 or 4 laps of your best laps, and squint at the screen where they're not overlapping each other,
right,
that is a potential area where the driver is lacking confidence in that particular corner. And you just go like, what's going on here? There's a spread here. Why are you not going through this corner at the same speed every time?
Sure. We can give you a long list of reasons if you haven't heard them all yet. So do you have any preferences in terms of the system or the system capabilities, or the, you know, if you were to prescribe to somebody you were working with, you know, the system, I don't care what gadgetry you have, but it's got to give me this for me to really be able to tell you, or begin to tell you, what could be going on?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because there's a lot of systems out there, and they start off, you know, with something on your phone maybe,
Yep.
And then all the way up to tens of thousands of pounds, in fact, for, you know, a pro level system. So what is it that is going to make the difference? So for me, that speed trace is fundamental. So for that, you need a reasonable GPS signal of around 10 hertz, which means it's taking a measurement 10 times a second of where you are in the world.
Right.
But the other thing to complement that is the data, and then you need some more context to go with it. So you've got the driver, you can ask the driver what's going on, but then the other thing you ideally want to have is the video together, because then you can say, well, am I in traffic? Did I get a tow? Did I actually run off the road there? What kind of line did I take through the corner? Because the GPS kind of gives you that, but it's not as it's not always that accurate.
Yeah.
So the video it really helps cement your context. So the video and the data really.
Yeah, and if there was a car in your way or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and they don't have to be. Sorry, they don't have to be integrated. You know, they don't have to be like a very expensive one. But like having those two pieces of information is like really, you know, now we're talking. You can actually do something.
So do you have tips of what to look at between runs and stints, especially when time is limited?
Yeah, when time's limited, that is a really good question. And some of this stuff does take a while to look at. And again, depending on the kind of system that you've got, you'll have more or less opportunity to look at stuff between sessions.
Sure.
The fundamental one for people starting out, the fundamental one is the racing line. So are you on the line, and are you using all the track? And then if you can talk through that with the driver and say, like, okay, well, where are you looking at the moment? And you know, you can quite easily work out, like, we can like brake a little bit later for the corner, and then it's a case of, well, we're not sure, but then you can roll the video forward and say, well, this is what 50 meters or 10 meters further looks like for you, so they can get a picture in their head. But the idea really is, certainly between sessions, is to just try and keep it simple, and you only want to go out with one thing to do. I mean, people say up to 3, whatever, but it can either be one kind of core skill thing or one corner thing to work on. It's a bit of a rule of thumb. So that's the kind of stuff that you can do between sessions. And in fairness, I think that's at any level of racing that is the same. You don't bombard the driver with, or bombard yourself if you're doing it for yourself. You don't want to bombard yourself with too much information. You just want to keep it simple and say, okay, what can I realistically achieve next time out?
Right. So just going back to your answer, because it's something we've been meaning to discuss for like a bunch of podcasts. I had, you know how when you're growing as a driver, you have these little aha moments. Well, one of the things that I realized when I'm trying to help out some of the people on our team, you can tell them that drive and use all the track and make sure you're doing that, but it's not drive out there. It's actually using enough speed and having your inputs time so that the car is almost forced to go out there, and you're not going out there because, well, I'm supposed to be out here on exit, or I'm supposed to go all the way to my apex, but it's actually, that is what the car is doing, and you're just kind of doing minor corrections if needed, and you're using the track because that's what you need, not because you were told to.
Yeah,
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's certainly on the corner exit. One of the interesting things is so most of your work as a driver really happens on the corner entry.
Sure.
It's because basically whatever you've done on the corner entry defines how the rest of the corner is going to go. so you've either braked too early, or you brake too late, or you've missed your turning point, or you've hit it just right. And then from then on, it's a kind of, you know, so the bit to work on is really that piece. But interestingly, if you go through the corner and it's maybe a bit slower, your entry is a bit slower, it's still worth running out on the line that you would take if you had no more grip, if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's still worth running that line, even if you could actually go a bit quicker. Does that make sense?
I agree. I think it's worth doing, but when people talk about the limit, they're actually talking about you have to go there because you need that much track, and that's the kind of the aspirational goal as you're progressing. And it was one of those, oh, I get it now. So yeah, I agree.
So that we use some of this data in like training or track days. It's kind of difficult when we're racing to actually follow the line in some races, because trying to stay on that line sometimes is very difficult. So
traffic
and stuff like that. So say, for instance, we're using it in training when we actually have the line and we're maximizing our racing ability. What is the best way of setting goals versus judging results to maximize the effectiveness of limited resources of time on the track?
So is that with using data or just in general, would you say?
I think data, I think just in general.
Both, yeah.
Yeah, because the HPDE driving events are a new thing for me. So we don't have the same thing in the UK. We have track days and we have racing, and I think these events sort of sit in the middle of that. Where it's sort of much more structured and organised.
You can come out and use one of our cars if that'll help you. I mean, come on
I'd
over.
love to. I'd absolutely love to. Let's get this pandemic out of the way, and I can't wait to get over it. So forgive me if I don't quite understand exactly. But I'll give you my thought on that. In the sense of navigating traffic is something that I think in the HPD there's a permission system with arms, and you've got to
It's usually less cars, so you'll have let's say 20 or 30 cars over a 2-mile track. This is not a lot of passing, and depending on the level, you'll have passing zones, and it'll be point buys required. And as you get better, it'll be anywhere or point buys not required. So it's kind of a range as you progress. Yeah. But since you have so fewer cars, you're more. Sometimes you'll have a drill or two for the first couple laps, and then you'll have 6 or 7 or 8 laps. It's like 20, 30-minute sessions. So that's kind of the structure.
But in England now, or the UK, how do you get your training? Do you have a private instructor, or do you just go out and kind of figure it out on the track, or educate yourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. All of the above.
I know how. You listen to your data-driven podcast.
It's the right answer.
That's how you do it.
Yeah, because in ours, usually what we'll have is we'll have more advanced drivers volunteer to instruct new people coming in, and then we'll have like 4 levels, and then you can go out and get a competitive license, or you can yourself become an instructor. You can move on to racing, but it's some of them are very education based, so they're actually teaching you how that car performs on the track. They teach you about the balance. They teach you about traction. They teach you about,
things
weight
they observe.
Transfer. Right. Yeah. Weight transfer. And then you go out and you practice those things that you learn. It's essentially like an abbreviated school.
Got it. Yeah. Right. So it does sound like a race school kind of approach.
Yeah. Not quite race school, but it's like,
it's
race school light.
But you'll have like one every month, as opposed to race school, which is like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever days, back to back. So you get a little more time to reflect on it a bit.
I tell you what, I think we are missing a trick here. I think we could really benefit from that.
I think that you would probably do very well, making probably a good chunk of money if you guys had one of those over there.
Well, let's chat offline. There are some, I think, practical reasons why that kind of thing doesn't happen. But the more I hear about that, the more it seems like that's a really obvious thing to do. Because the other thing about racing is that not everyone wants to go racing.
Right.
They
just want to drive quickly. So
they just want to be in a controlled atmosphere where they're learning how to race.
Yeah,
learning how to drive faster.
The track days are. You can take anything round. They do try and split them into types of vehicle a little bit sometimes, but on some of the days it's just you just go with anything. I mean, I was on a track day the other day, and there was a guy in a van driving around, and it's like,
Did he pass you?
No. The guy, there was a Volvo Estate going. I don't know if you know that car. Yep. It's a really old one. Yeah, and he passed me. But I was having some technical problems as well.
That's what we're going with.
Yep. To go to the question about the traffic navigation, and that is part of a form of racing. That if you're in endurance racing, that you just have to do that. So
fun. It's like chess.
Yeah, and it's just you've got to make the decision, and you've got to plan it out, and you've got to. And you may not have very long to do it, so it's good practice. It's just that's another skill. You may not be, hammering your fastest lap, but you're learning to. Again, you're getting that exposure with other cars on the track, passing other cars, and it could be valuable for you, in any form of racing. So, yeah.
Yeah, my favorite thing to do, especially when we get in traffic, is we race in 3 levels on the track at one time, and we'll have a lot of cars. We'll have like 100 cars on the track. It's my favorite thing to do is to stuff people behind the slow cars and then follow the train out. My favorite thing to do because they have planned poorly on their execution. Yeah.
100 cars on the track.
Yeah.
We've done 140. The record over here is like 230.
No, I have never heard that.
Well,
But
I'm
so far,
sorry,
the
but
highest that I've heard was like 140 so far. But
What kind of tracks are these? Are these like really long
yeah,
tracks?
no, not
yeah,
that long.
yeah.
It's you know, a small group for endurance racing is probably 30 or 40. That's on the really, really small side. And on the
Hmm.
large side, it can get to above 100 for sure. And
Yeah,
it's ugly.
it's
It's fun though.
it's fun. It's
So what
really
do you
fun.
want to be then? Do you want to be the slow car or do you want to be the fast car?
Oh,
So
definitely the fast car.
so there's really a few different types of racing. If it, let's say it's a class ABC, A being fast and C being slow. In C, you're really racing driving in your mirrors. In B, you're kind of racing. In B and A, you're kind of racing both. And C is really hard on the driver because you don't want to be that guy or that girl and be the literal moving speed bump. But in B and especially in A, you get to race both directions, and that just makes it takes it up a level. Because when we first started, we were obviously C or aspiring to be C level drivers in a C level car. So, we were slow, but we tried to not be that guy. But as we got better, and then you start to progress with your skill, and you're able to do that, you can actually race both windshields, and that makes it a ton more fun. So.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the super, super fast car to have the most fun. You will win. Or you don't want to be the super, super slow car because you will have fun, but you definitely won't win. But somewhere in between is about perfect for, at least for us at this point right now. So you get to race both cars coming from behind and cars going from in front to behind. So
it's organized insanity, but it's awesome. It is so awesome.
It's not that organized.
Yeah.
We have a race over here with one of the clubs. It's called the Burkett 6 Hour. It's a 6-hour race at Silverstone Grand Prix track, and it is every kind of car from some very, very, very quick cars to some old vintage, very, very slow cars.
Yeah.
And everything in the middle.
Right.
Yeah, that's kind of it. Yeah.
It's quite nice. You guys might like it. It's quite a nice format. So you can have teams of 6, but you all race your own car, and it's like a relay race. So
okay.
Yeah, so you come in, and then the next guy goes out in their car. Isn't that cool?
That is kind of cool. It is. It is kind of cool.
There's all sorts of rules about having more than one car from your team on the track at the same time, and all this sort of stuff. And the other nice thing is a handicap. So because otherwise, how can you race against these old vintage cars?
Sure.
So everyone's given a lap time for their class, and so you're racing against that lap time. And so there's a scratch race, which is like first over the post, and then there's a handicap, which is how well did you do in class, and so it throws up some interesting results. But in terms of looking in your mirrors, I've done that a few times in a relatively slow car, and you'll be going down the straight, and you'll be like looking in your mirrors like nothing. Oh my god, where did that car come from?
Yeah. So we raced in the 24 Hours of Lemons, which is a spoof off of 24 Hours of Le Mans.
What? I thought Lemons came first.
Yeah. So we can't really. We decided that we can't really do the straight 24 hours. So we'll do like 7 hours on one day, and then maybe 5 hours on the next day. And it's basically low dollar racing. So you can take like your grandmom's car, put a roll cage in it, and then, see how fast you can make it. But the idea is to keep it low cost. I like it because if something happens to my car, I don't feel bad walking away from it. I could just go build another, so there's that. But, at the same time, it's a great entry level for racing because there is training. People are aware of everybody on the track between fast and slow. And it's more about going out and having a really good time with your friends more than it is about going out there and winning the race. Although people do go out there for winning the race, it's about going out there and going fast, learning how to ride, learning how to drive, having a good time. The garages are fun. The pits are fun. And it's just a lighter version of racing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
It's because that fun side of things gets lost sometimes, particularly in a racing paddock.
Right. Right.
As you move up, yeah.
Right. And that's what they're saying. Well, I want to go and be a professional, a racer or like a really competitive racer. And I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, I could see that, but with that comes the hustle. You got to hustle, and you got to hustle for money. You got to hustle for donors. And that's where all the work is besides just the car,
Yeah.
but this is just, having a good time on your weekend. You can make it as competitive as you want. You can just go out there and have a really good time, and it's just laughs with your friends is basically what it is. The cars are usually, we drive a Loki truck, so our cars are all superhero cars, and we dress up as superheroes for tech. We have to go through tech, dress up as superheroes, and then after that, the serious racing begins. It's just fun and light and having a good time.
Yeah, and so I had a guy on my podcast show. So because I've got the background in Olympic sports, I thought, well, these guys, because you know they coach athletes, and coaching is not something that has been prevalent in motorsports. It's increasingly now, but I thought, well, I'd get those guys on and ask them, like, what should we do as coaches and things like that. And what was really interesting was one of the points that come to mind when you were talking about that. It was a case of, like, we don't go to the Olympic Games. We say, like, we're going to try and win X gold medals, right? But that's not necessarily how they define success.
Right.
And it was like they're defining success about what they can control, because they don't know how anyone else is going to turn up on the day. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the question he asked me was like, well, what's a win for you? What's a win for you today? And that kind of event that you're talking about is 100% about defining what a win is for you. And a win is having fun, enjoying the time, just having a bit of a laugh, and just enjoy being in that community of racers. Mm-hmm. Going around, and you're going to try and drive as fast as you can, because that's also fun.
It is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The limit is the limit, whether the limit's 40 miles an hour or 90 miles an hour. It is what it is.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because that's why I asked you, why do you want to be in the slow car or the fast car? Because you can be absolutely on the limit in the slow car, having loads of fun, but you're never going to win.
Yeah.
Yep.
Whatever car we get in is a slow car, Samir.
Is it? Come on.
Getting much better.
That's right. We did manage to stumble our way to our first ever class victory, so we'll take it.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you.
That feels good. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. As I predicted, we have 8 million episodes to get to. I have to get to one because you also, not just your data, we got tons more data questions. I've whited out so many of them, it's scary. You also deal with car preparation and dialing in and testing. And I don't know, this is an analogy that Bill uses in his wee little brain. If you picture dialing in a car as the same thing as like a home stereo, you've got the first level being the volume knob, right? I got my stereos working, and then you've got your second level maybe being a treble or a bass, trying to see, do I want my highs higher or my lows lower, and that kind of refines it a little bit. And then when you get really, really fancy, you have like these EQ things, which is, I want my 20 megahertz to be at 0.6 above, and I want my 20,000 megahertz to be whatever. Anyway, is there something similar or in an approach for dialing in a race car? Because I think, from what I've seen, and it's a limited sample size, a lot of people are screwing up their car more than they're helping their car by going to either adjusting this knob before they should have looked at that knob, or worrying about the thing that cost $50,000 when they should have worried about the $5. And is that a logical approach where you kind of do it by steps as opposed to throwing money at the car?
So the questions around
what would be like your top tier, what knob should you turn on your car to start to dial it in, and in kind of a logical, is there a logical progression from, hey, let's start with, let's just say it's tires, tire pressure, and tire temperature as your first step. Then you start going to, do you have your 15 direction adjustable coilovers, or do you just say, do you have a sway bar or an anti-sway bar? It depends on which side of the pond we're on. Is there some kind of logical sequence that somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing should do before they start unfixing their car?
Yeah.
Unintentionally.
It's a great subject and a great question, because cars they're a bit complicated. I'm honest with you. Not quite as complicated as drivers, but
it's getting close.
Yeah. So you put them together, and sometimes you wonder how we get round at all.
How many degrees of freedom do we have to mess up?
Yeah, exactly. But there's some fundamental rules, aren't there? That the lighter car is going to go quicker. The tire's the only thing that touches the road.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure it's you're nursing that tire and getting the most out of it.
Well, the tire's the only thing that hopefully touches the road.
Well, yeah, okay. So I'll tell you something. So depending on the quality of your multi-adjustable dampers, it is actually typically in touch with the road only about half the time. Just to make you feel even more worried. So there's only about a palm print of your hand in touch with the road, right. And even that is only in touch with it about half the time. It's somewhere between half and 70% of the time, depending on the roughness of the tarmac that you're on.
Right.
And then when it rains, obviously that reduces. So it's some of the classroom stuff is sort of, well, you don't want to put people off completely, but yeah, the tires are definitely the right place to start. But equally, when you get into the tuning side of it, there's two objectives. There's the trying to find the absolute best setup for your car on that track, on that day, in that weather condition. Right? So there's quite a few things there.
For that driver.
And then there's the driver.
Yeah.
And really what we're trying to do is give that driver confidence. So and this is 100% at the pro level as well. So we've got all these stereo adjustments, to use your analogy, that will affect the performance potential of the car. And what we want to do as an engineer is make sure that the driver can get as much of that performance potential as consistently as possible for as much of the time on the track as they can. And that's how they're going to go quicker.
Sure.
So to say, what do you start with in terms of adjustments is one of those how long's a piece of string questions in a way, but 100% the place to start is the tyres. And because without the tyres operating properly, all the rest of it is irrelevant, to be honest. Because the tyres dominate everything to do with your car. Your ability to corner, your ability to stop, your ability to go. And that's it. I mean, there isn't anything else. They define the performance potential of your car. And they change as every lap you go around. So you start off in the cold, notionally cold, and then you drive around and they heat up, and they'll change shape, and they'll change temperature, and they'll warm up in one bit, and they'll not warm up in another bit. And so just spending a bit of time to understand, and I've got some resources. I've got a new ebook coming out on tyres as it happens. So thanks for the plug for tyres.
It's the first of many plugs. Don't worry.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, so just to take people through step by step. Okay, well, this sounds intimidating. It's like they're not intimidating. They're just black and round. You can only adjust the pressure, so that's a good thing. There's only one thing you can adjust. But you can, if you adjust them differently, you can adjust the balance of the car. You can add more stiffness to the front, more stiffness to the rear. They overheat, they don't overheat. So all of this stuff you can play with, and once you get a good handle on your tyres, then there's other things you can look at. Obviously, if your engine is 100 horsepower down on power for some reason, if you're a one-make class, you're never going to do it. But so there's almost sort of sort of hygiene factors, as in like your car works properly.
Hopefully,
and then there's and then there's the performance stuff, which is what we're talking about here. We're sort of noodling around the performance stuff. So, you know, you can't get into the performance until your car actually works.
So let's pretend that we've got. I guess the first step would be to use the tire temperature pressure distribution as your input variable that you're monitoring, and then eventually, do you move that to the output where you start worrying about your alignment and your suspension settings, different types of adjustments that you may have? Is that the logical way to do things?
It is logical, but if you roll it back and think of what are we trying to do with these changes, why would you change anything? Why would you change anything on your car?
Well, I mean, the goal, whether you get there or not, is to see if you can get a little more performance out of the car, either through a higher speed or a higher capability or less wear and tear, in my mind.
Okay. So what about so how you define performance is quite important here. So if we dig into that a little bit and go, well, if I come and say, like what you want to do is you want to adjust your front sway bar or anti-roll bar, and that's the first thing you should you want to do. What is it that you're hoping to achieve by? Now I'm sort of being a bit devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
But it's just trying to get people to think through. Mm-hmm. If we go all the way back to like this methodical approach I'm talking about,
sure,
or advocating and I think it's like, okay, so we're going to make this change, but why are we doing it? So, or at least if we do it, what do we expect to happen? Because you can always do it that way. You can just experiment and say, well, I quite like the car as it is. Let's try and make it quicker. So we'll try something, and we can try 10 different things, and if they all make you slower, you've still learned something.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's still worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, absolutely.
But the important thing is to think through. Right. If I change this sway bar, if I change these clicks on this damper, if I change this tire pressure, what do I expect to happen? Because I've got some information that's saying I should change that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's something saying, oh, I've got like too much understeer as I or push, as I turn into the corner, right? So it's like, oh, right, okay. That's a thing that I don't want. So now I've got loads of these different tweaking options that I can do to try and adjust that, including it has, in that particular example, the driver.
Yes.
Because if I turn the steering wheel too quickly, then So there's all sorts of different things you can do here, and I think it's really important to be methodical about how you approach these kind of technical changes, and then you'll know, and you'll work it out for yourself, for your car. And I think that's really the goal, is to give yourself confidence that, right, we're going to a new track and the car's behaving in this way. Right, before, when it was behaving like that, we did this and it worked because of this reason, and we changed it by this amount, and we'll do that. We'll try that again, and that should work. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah. Is it going to be common? Like if I turn the knob to the left, let's just say we're doing this for whatever adjustment it matters. Turning it to the left gives us more oversteer, and turning it to the right gives us more understeer. Is that going to tend to be common among the different car platforms or amongst different types of cars, being front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, or is it going to vary individually from car to car?
Yes. So another way to think about this is if you go to the extremes. Right. So what we get, and I'll be honest with you, I do find myself guilty of doing this too. Where we get caught up with changes is doing quite small changes on the car, and then going around and saying, oh, I've made a small change and I can't really feel the difference, or I think I've convinced myself that it does feel a little bit different. What's quite useful to do as a process is to do a big change. So you sort of go, let's just go completely crazy here. Disconnect the sway bar completely and see what happens. You know.
Yep.
You know. And then we just sort of calibrate yourself into what effect these changes are going to make. And when you talk about oversteer and understeer, it's kind of at what point, what point in what type of corner were you getting that? Were you experiencing that? You know, was it as you turn in oversteer? Or was it on the exit? You know what I mean? So there's different things going on at different points. A front-wheel drive car will be different to a rear-wheel drive car. This kind of thing, but fundamentally, some of these things don't change. So if you've got a car that's stiffer at the front, it's going to understeer potentially. So like ridiculously stiff,
right?
It's not going to turn because it's not going to be able to and flip the other way around. So at a macro level, at a big level, yes, there's common rules of thumb for adjusting things to balance your car. But when you actually come down to it, I think that a more practical and pragmatic way of doing it is if you can go and run on a test day and just do some changes for yourself and actually feel it, because ultimately how you feel as a driver is going to give you that confidence to be able to balance the car to your liking. And if it's balanced to your liking, then you're going to go way quicker.
Sure. So I guess indirectly you answered the question, but I had one more. My podcast editor is saying that I need to trim. But if you have to do a change, would you view the change more from the data or from the video or from the driver? Like, which one would you use as the resource? So sometimes, you make a change, the driver says, oh, that was awesome, it felt great, I was fast, and you look at the time and it's like you were slow, or vice versa. And so I guess who wins in the triumvirate of data, video, or driver, I guess? Or is it depends?
It's a good question. I wouldn't like to put emphasis more than, and I suppose what you're highlighting here is a really good point around the tension between the human being and this sort of objectivity, and then and then another human being interpreting what's going on,
right?
To try and make the right decision, because the other human being who's not in the car may think, well, the driver's not very good, and the driver might think that the car's not very good, and the data doesn't. The data is just the data.
Or you've got 5 drivers in the car, one likes this and one likes that,
Yeah. So what do you do? How do you? I mean, do you have the same drivers in the same car?
We do. We have for each of our races. Usually, we'll have 4, maybe 5 drivers. So it's a series of accommodations, because for the last race, we just had our all ladies team out there. And we made it so that at full extension, the seat was built for somebody who's 5'7", and that's it, 5'7" and shorter. So when they said, "Hey, could you go move the truck?" I physically said, "No, I cannot." So, so we try and make it centered upon most of the drivers, with the ability to expand, to the taller driver, to the faster driver, to the slower driver. But we tend to make a series of accommodations that you try to do the best you can, because, one person may like the car super loose in the back and, love turning that way. And other people need it to be much more neutral, or, some people even like understeer. We've got one of those. So it's hard.
So how do you deal with that with your car in your situation? Because that's a really interesting position to be in, where you've got one car and multiple drivers that you're trying to balance.
Well, I mean, the simple one-word answer is usually poorly, but we try to, I think we try to keep it as close to neutral as possible to be the most accommodating to the different driver styles. We try to keep you know, so the smallest driver can still reach the pedals comfortably, and the largest driver may be a little cramped. Or the other big one is eyeline sight height. We just found out that we may have been keeping the eye line too low for some of our smaller drivers in our standard setup, because they were very, very, very happy with the very high eye line that we had in the last set. So we may need to make adjustments. So we're trying to get it so that it's the most neutral and the most open and the easiest to drive for, because we've had 6 drivers at one race, so it's hard to get it to be perfect for one and as good as it can be for the other. And we tend to err towards the side of the less experienced or less skilled driver, because the better driver should be able to deal with more. So I guess that's our philosophy.
This time around is for some of our drivers is that we have those bald spot seat fillers. So we're actually going to have a seat filler that will encase us, and
custom seat insert.
Right. I've also come across a team to where they almost have like a designed booster seat for inside there. It's just, you can just pick it up and it lifts them up and it lifts them forward just a little bit and still fits them in the seat. So it's not necessarily like the heat activated pebble kit that we have or whatever it is. So we're going to be carrying one of those around next, or at least Jennifer and I. So that should help us.
Yeah, I mean, so ergonomics is basically what you've talked about.
Yeah. But then for the driver's side as well, for the car setup side, we'll try and make things more or less neutral, maybe slight bit of oversteer, but trying to keep the car neutral front and back.
And how do you work out, like, so with the numbers, with the data, you can kind of, if you've got the right sensors and things, or you can notionally work out an understeer balance or for the car, like you can see it. Are you doing that, or is that something that you do more on the feel, on a feel basis?
At this point, it's more feel, because some of especially some of our drivers are relatively new, so their driver feedback quality isn't spectacular, so they don't know what they should be saying or what they should be feeling. So we more or less try to get a more like a standard setup for a nominal road track, and we try to apply that for each of the different circuits we go to. So we're far from optimal for anything, but it's kind of a broadly based, this is pretty good for most people, and we tend to err towards the side of the less experienced driver, because the better drivers that we get in our cars can make the accommodations as a driver that we don't want to ask too much of the less experienced drivers.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's right, but that's what we've been doing.
But it's a team sport, isn't it? So you've got to accommodate like the right approach. And what do you adjust on the car to make it more neutral or more loose?
The primary ones we do are tire pressures, tire make. We'll actually do tire size, sometimes width or profile, and then sway bars. We don't have a lot of other easy tweaks on most of our vehicles, because a lot of them are not coilovers and they're not adjustable. So that's kind of a bigger issue to change. So the few knobs we have, and then we try and keep everything, keep our brakes as cool as possible. So we may over brake our car in terms of what brake system we'll put in there, and we'll cool it, not to the point where it's frozen, but to the point where it's as cool as we can keep it, and more or less at a standard normal temperature. And then we'll just try and we at our level in our team, we don't test as much as we probably should in our race cars. We've been more focused in the past few years on driver improvement in multiple cars, as opposed to dialing in the race car. So at some point we'll care more about being at the pointy end of the field, but right now we're more worried about consolidating as a team and trying to get our drivers more tightly spaced and shifting the entire team faster than making everything optimal for an individual driver or an individual track.
Yeah.
All right, sir. We can't let you go without talking to you about your podcast, your Data Driven podcast. When you started it, what was the areas that you were trying to focus in?
So the idea of the podcast was to bring some lessons from the professionals to the amateur, and it's very much started as the amateur racer, but then that's grown into the amateur truck day person, or HPDE, as I've now discovered that's a thing, and all this kind of, people who just love their motorsports. And the idea really was for me to talk to these professionals in our sport and ask them on my audience's behalf the questions that I think they would be interested in and be able to contribute to. So there's all sorts of different types of people in professional motorsports. There's the drivers, so we've had Formula One drivers. I've had the Stig on there, the ultimate racing driver, touring car drivers, all these kind of things. So there's the driver's perspective, which is really quite interesting, and we talk about things like nerves. I had a conversation with this chap called Matt Neal, and he's got the most touring car races at professional level, over 300 races. And I said, surely you don't get nervous. How do you, what tips have you got for us amateurs about controlling nerves at the beginning of a race? He goes, Samir, I get nervous every time. And he discovers this. He's really superstitious. He's got to get up one way, has to have breakfast in one way, has to get in the car the one way. He has all these routines that he goes through in the car. He envisions the first corner and all sorts of stuff. It's like, these are great tips. I mean, it's like, wasn't expecting that. So they're the kind of conversations on the drivers. I've also had some engineers on, so some people who work in Formula One and rallying, and then they talk about the subjects we were talking about there, about setting cars up, and which is kind of nice because I've taken some of their stuff in answer to your question, to be honest. And so that's the idea. Is how can we learn from what these people do every day for their job? This is their job, making cars go quicker in a circle. Sure. How do we? So even if we haven't got the time and resources to do it ourselves, right? As at an amateur level, we haven't got hundreds of people like a Formula One team. It's a case of what can we take from that, and at least we have an awareness of a professional approach, and then and what can we take from that? And interestingly, some of the guys on there have talked about things like literally just making some notes, doing things in a methodical way, making sure the driver's comfortable, because the driver drives to their limit. Like the driver drives to their perception of the limit of the car. And so our job as race engineers and coaches is to help them develop more confidence to push that limit and give them more experience of pushing a car to and through a limit, so that then you can move the limit further away and go quicker. Do you see what I mean? So all these sort of great tips that you think, actually, that's really obvious. I never thought. Well, now you say it, that's really obvious. But yeah, and it's been absolutely a real honour to talk to all these different people. I don't really say much, to be honest. I just sort of say hello and then they just talk. It's great to listen to them.
That's great.
So we've used and seen your beginner's guide to data and when to shift spreadsheet and a couple of the other spreadsheets. Any other highlights for our audience to go look for?
Yeah, so the data course is a good one. The shift spreadsheets that came about because of a lot of paddock folklore about when's the best to shift gear. So
when the light comes on, right?
Yeah. When does the light come on? Yeah. And it's not only up, actually, it's down. Like, when do you change down? That is the bigger one. But anyway. So you can work it out. And the data course is just, the beginner's thing. There's a whole load of stuff on there about tyres, and a new ebook coming out which sort of summarises a whole load of that. So it tells you about like tire pressures, how to take tire temperatures, what that means, how you can use that to tune your handling, which is exactly what you talked about doing. Then there's stuff on there about I've got the course, but then there's a whole load of other stuff about data analysis for drivers. So you don't necessarily have to do the course. You can still learn a whole load of stuff there that hopefully will answer like reasonable questions. How to use data, how to create those side-by-side videos that you see on the TV sometimes. How some of the metrics are actually calculated. So I don't know if you're familiar with like a lap delta thing that goes on a dashboard that tells you whether you're gaining or losing lap time when you go around. It's sort of just a quick explanation of how that actually works. There's loads of stuff. There's a book. So I took the first 20 episodes of the podcast show because I was so overwhelmed by these conversations, and it was interesting that they were starting to say similar things. So similar people, different people who'd never known each other at all, from all over the world in motorsports, and they're saying the same kind of things. And I thought there's some stuff going on here. So I took the first 20 episodes, and I thought it was a 2-week. In my head, it was a 2-week project. I'll just summarise all that and put it all together in a nice book. And it took 2.5 months. And basically, I went through every show and summarised quotes from all the different people and put them into lesson chapters, so that I made the notes so you don't have to.
Right.
So there we go. There's loads of stuff on there, and new stuff coming out all the time. So I welcome. The newsletter comes out every week, so please sign up to that, and you won't miss anything.
All right.
I get to edit now.
So, we've seen and used your. Hold on. Do you guys have goals, or have your goals changed through your podcast since when you started?
As in like the guests
the podcast,
or
the podcast goals.
Mm-hmm.
No, I don't think so.
No, you don't have to change it.
Why do you ask that?
Ours changed a ton from what we first started to where we are now, and it may change again. Depending on if Vicki ever decides to do an intro or things like that. But it's we've kind of fallen into what we think is where we can contribute the most to our audience and help them get better. So I was just wondering, had things changed from what you had anticipated your podcast being to where it is now? It's still relatively early on, but
it is. I don't think so too much. Hopefully I'm getting a little bit better at interviewing people. but other than that change, I hope it's delivering the value to people that I intend it to. I personally find it very interesting to talk to these individuals, and they're giving up their time to talk to us and share their insights. One of the things I suppose that I have started to be a bit more specific on is trying to not flip it the other way, trying to get some actionable stuff out of people, because there's a lot of ideas, good ideas stuff, and then but what I want my audience to have is like something actionable and take away, that I can actually go and try that, or I can see myself doing that, rather than going, that's a great idea, but I haven't got 200 people. It's like, what can I actually do from this show? And whilst I had it at the beginning, I think that's more crystallized as I've gone along, to try and really make sure that we get to the end of a show and there's real takeaways for people to try. So
I think that the difference is you started your podcast knowing what you already knew, and we started our podcast knowing nothing. So maybe that's why ours changed.
Yeah, that's about right.
It is.
Yeah, but we're always learning. For
sure.
That's one thing. That's one thing that is interesting, is that all my stuff, like my site, my show, my book, my course, everything, it just appeals to one section of the community of motorsports, and that's the community who want to learn, who are open to learning, and because I'm learning. I'm learning all the time. I just every time I do something, I'm stealing all my ideas off the people I talked to on the show. I'm listening to what other people had to say. I'm listening to you and how you balanced your car for 6 different people. And it's like, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll probably try that if I'm in that situation. And it's one of those things. It's just love learning about this sport and trying to get more fun out of it and more enjoyment. And it's not only the competition on the track; it's the competition of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
And
it is.
Yeah. So I personally, I find that interesting, and I hope that appeals to my audience as well. So.
Yeah, I guess we never went over it when we started talking before, but we started our podcast in between our second ever time on track and our third ever time on track. So we started real early. Do you have any highlights so far that you look at from your podcast, or any bucket list items left that you're looking to get?
Well, the book's a great summary of all the highlights.
It is.
Honestly, I couldn't tee you up better for these things. No, seriously, I think just having the time to speak to such high level people. I mean, the really, honoured to have these guests on the show. I think. It's people like Rob Wilson stick out, Ross Bentley stick out,
mm-hmm.
as people who have really made their work, their craft, and themselves, and they're always looking to improve. So that's been fascinating. I think there was a good show I did with a rally engineer,
mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, come on, Damien, how do dampers work? And he came back and he said, right, Samir, they're like a really bad bicycle pump.
Mm-hmm.
And then carried on to explain all this stuff about the tyres not touching the road and how they all work and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, you just listen to this guy and you think, actually, I now feel as if I half know about dampers. And before, they're this kind of crazy voodoo in the corner.
Magic box. Yeah.
Yeah. The simulation guys have been interesting. I've had both simulation from an engineering point of view and the gaming world, mm-hmm. because there's just a course of guys on and talking about that. How do they take a real car and make a virtual version of it that people can drive on their, in their living room, and the detail that those guys go into is phenomenal. So, that's fascinating and interesting to hear about. So, I'm kind of like not answering your question.
That's okay.
I just think there's too many highlights. There's too many highlights.
Yeah.
Trust me, it gets worse as you get more. We're 220 something. I bet. It's like, what's your favorite guest? I'm like, I've had 220 episodes. I don't know. Yeah. What comes to mind right now is different than 15 minutes from now. So
exactly.
So, Samir, how can our audience keep in contact with you and or follow you and your team?
So the main thing's the newsletter, and so sign up to the newsletter at yourdatadriven.com, and mm-hmm. look out for the podcast on all of the usual Apple, Google, Spotify, etc. Places, wherever
on
you like
all the things.
Yeah, I mean, just, I'll be honest with you, when I started this, I didn't really know that much about podcasts, and then it was like, actually, they're just, oh my god, there's this whole thing, and everyone listens to them in their own different way. So that's the Your Data Driven podcast. I was having a particularly uncreative naming day when I came up with that, and just, or even if you just want to reach out, I'm on all of the social media, Instagram, Facebook, occasionally on Twitter. I'm a bit of a Luddite when it comes to social media, I'll be honest with you, but I'm working on that. So yeah, the site's the main thing, and just send me an email, hello@yourdatadriven, and I'll get back to you.
You do, and you have many times, which is scary, but very welcome, and we appreciate it.
Yeah.
So Samir, it was great having you on for the first of many, many, many times that we will ask you to come on. It's whether you come back or not is up to you. If you're a race driver, you're used to making bad decisions, you can come back anytime. We do appreciate everything. I think the best thing about your information is you make it some ways a very technical answer in a way that everybody should be able to understand it. So when you say race engineering simplified on your website, we fully agree. So thank you for everything you've already done, and we can't wait for some more stuff, and we will watch intently and see what's coming forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Oh boy, there he is.
He looks all professional. He's going to make us look bad on our own podcast.
Look, he's got such a nice backdrop too. Look at him.
Well, if I turn this off, I've got an excellent hotel room.
Yeah. I have these guys here. I don't know who they are, but it's a great pick.
They look happy.
Yes, they're in our television room. They're all watching movies. So
that's right.
Wonderful.
How are you?
Yeah, very well. Very well. How are you guys?
I'm doing good. Where are you out of?
So in the UK, in a town called Warwick, which is like the county town of Warwickshire. So in the middle of the UK.
Oh, okay.
In fact, we have a tree. I only discovered this recently. Actually, we have a tree near a roundabout that has a plaque next to it that says that this is the centre of England.
Oh wow!
So for someone who likes to be by the sea, I couldn't be further from the coast.
I was going to say you missed the coast by a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. It's 2.5 hours in any direction.
We understand.
Where are you guys based?
Well, Vicki and I live in northeastern Pennsylvania, which is on the eastern coast of the U.S. Unfortunately, I got my weeks mixed up, and I am in Huntsville, Alabama, which is about 1,400 miles due south, maybe a little west, sweating, and at a conference. So it's fun.
Oh.
Yeah, he went right from the race, came home, slept, got up, and went right to Alabama. He went from one end of the United States all the way down to the other end of the United States.
Yeah.
Driving
as well.
Well,
yeah.
It's easier and cheaper to drive in spite of it being ridiculously far, but it is what it is. Nothing like driving 1,400 miles to the post-race hangover weekend. So it's awesome.
Yes.
Their predisposition is more the artsy side of the world. So getting them into the data side of the world has been...
Well, I do have to say data hasn't come into the factor for us yet because we have been so working on we're about ready to cross over into, okay, now we're kind of narrowing down our driving. We have the driving understood, how we're supposed to be driving our lines. And once we start getting those sequencing down and understanding the track more and understanding traffic more, then data starts coming into it. But like Jennifer's HPDE 2, she just came into HPDE 2. I kind of been crossing out to training level 3, and we go up to training level 4. So we're still in our learning sequences of our driving. So data hasn't entered really into it.
Although we've been racing,
but it's
for
starting
4 years.
to. Yeah, but but now everything's starting to come along. So now we're touching in on it.
Well, it's interesting, I think, the perception of people's perception about it, because I would say it has value at every level.
Okay.
But you would do something different with a new driver than you do with an experienced driver.
Right.
The same information, but you just use it in a different way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I know that entering into the ending HPDE to getting ready to cross over, now Bill's saying these are the areas you need to work on. And now with that data coming to me now I can understand it. But entering in and just like navigating traffic and learning how to shift and stuff like that, it's really not ready for that. But now, again, it's starting to become useful to me.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Mhm.
So Samir, we have about 8 podcasts worth of questions for you. So we're going to let you slide. We're calling this our episode 1 with you, and if you'll put up with us, we will have you on anytime in the future, sir.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So,
Oh, okay. You got me worried now.
no, I had a document that I've been working on from the start of your podcast with, if I got to ask him, this is what I want to know, but I have to also kind of think about the all the listeners, because we try and get everybody from the, hey, I haven't even started yet,
Yeah.
to the accomplished, I don't know if decorated, but accomplished driver, multiple years and multiple seasons of racing, and everybody in between. And the goal of our episode is always at least one thing where you get to be a better driver, or understand something, or one of those aha things. So, as long as we get one of those, we call it a win, but we'll get there.
Okay.
All right.
Do my best.
Well, every time you're on a podcast,
I very much prefer being on the other side of the microphone, like asking the questions rather than being the subject. But it's, we're all friends, so.
well, you can do your best, Ross Bentley, because we ask Ross a question and he asks us a question right back, and we end up answering it for him. So, if you want to do that, the precedent's already been set.
He's a legend, that guy.
He is. He's been on.
Ross is doing it. I'll do it.
Ross has been on 4 or 5 times now, so he puts up with us for some reason. We don't know why. We definitely owe him something, so we'll get him.